So
pot.
one good thing to remember at this time of the year, for any plants that are in pottery, you got to remember that if the soil dries out to the point where you get an inch crack line between your pot and your soil, or you see dry crack lines in your soil, when you water your soil, the water just kind of runs down the side or down through the cracks and not actually gets into the plant. So what you want to do is, I use my fingers, you just want to go and break up the soil along the edge or push the soil down on the edge and just kind of get more air in the soil before you water. So then when you do water, you'll notice that the water will, or the soil will pick up the water like a sponge, and the water will sit in there and not run out the bottom. So always remember, at this time of the year when it's hot and you're watering often, the soil dries out often, and you want to make sure it doesn't dry to the point where it cracks, because then your watering is going to be more or less on a daily basis. And if you break up the soil, then your watering is going to be once every day or once every second or third day, because you're getting more moisture in your soil.
So, but now it's hot now. So what seed should start now?
Seed?
Yeah.
Right now it's pretty much all the leafy greens, the brassicas, so broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts you can. And then all your leafy greens, so your lettuces, your mustard greens, your you can do most of your herbs, so you can do basil, cilantro, dill. You gotta remember though, like dill and cilantro, if it's too hot, they'll go to flower. So if you're gonna be starting seed in the heat like this, you want to make sure that your plants grow in morning, afternoon sun, and then shade at the hottest time of the day, to avoid any of your herbs going into flower. And that's basically more like mostly your cilantro, dill, and sometimes parsley go to flower if it's too stressed out. But yeah, this time of the year, it's really just your leafy greens you can start. Tomatoes, squash, zucchinis, all those, it's too late to do by seed. So just remember that if you want to be growing any tomato plants or anything like that, you want to buy them as a plant starter. So that includes your peppers, tomatoes, squash, pumpkins, eggplants, all those summer kind of fruiting ones. At this stage, you have to buy them as a plant starter. And right now in Vancouver, we're sitting around June 10th.
210. What's mean? 210.
June 10th.
June 10th.
So if you're around the same time in BC or anywhere else in Canada at this stage, it will be too late to start by seed for those summer vegetables, but you can still buy plant starters and put your plant starters in the ground, and they'll still give you a good amount of fruit this year.
So, like we were saying, at this time of the year, it's a great idea to focus on leafy greens and some of the brassicas. Those are your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. Now, the nice thing about these crops is they actually prefer cooler temperatures. So, even though it feels like summer is getting started, these plants will really thrive in early summer if you give them the right spot. If you're just starting out, I always recommend looking at your garden in terms of microclimates. Think about where you get full morning sun but shade in the afternoon. Those are going to be your gold mine spots for greens and herbs that don't love the heat. You know, sometimes we forget that plants, just like people, can get a little stressed when it gets too hot. So, if you're wondering why your cilantro or dill bolted so quickly, well, they probably didn't get that midday break from the sun. A trick I use is planting taller crops like tomatoes or using a little bamboo shade cloth during the peak of the day. You don't have to go buy fancy stuff. Even a light bed sheet draped over a steak can work wonders. The goal is just to knock off a few degrees and give your herbs a fighting chance. Now, speaking of tomatoes, zucchinis, and peppers, if you haven't started them by seed by now, it's probably best to grab starter plants. Around June 10th, here in Vancouver, we're at the tail end of the window for summer crops by seed. So, if you're standing there with a pack of tomato seeds in your hand, I'd say save those for next year or start them indoors as an experiment. But Don't let that discourage you. Buying starter plant is not cheating. In fact, it's one of the best ways to make sure you get a harvest, especially if you're just starting out. And it saves you weeks of babying seedlings, which can get tricky when it's hot and dry. That brings me to another big tip that most people overlook: soil's moisture retention. In the heat, your soil is going to dry out fast, especially in containers or raised beds. Remember what we talked about earlier? When your soil starts pulling away from the pot or cracks open, it creates these little channels where water just escapes without soaking in. You end up watering and watering, but the roots stay thirsty. So take a minute to get your hands in there. Gently break up the top couple inches of soil before watering. It helps the water sink in evenly instead of rushing down the sides. I even add a top dressing of mulch. That can be straw, shredded leaves, or even grass clippings if they haven't been sprayed with chemicals. That thin layer locks in moisture and keeps your plants way happier. Another pro tip: water in the early morning. You've probably heard that before, but let me explain why it matters. When you water in the morning, you give the plant all day to absorb the moisture and face the heat. If you water in the evening, that water sits in the soil overnight, and that can attract fungus, mold, and all kinds of pests. Early morning watering helps the plant and keeps your soil healthier. Let's talk about succession planting for a second. If you're growing lettuce or other quick crops, you don't need to plant everything all at once. Do a small batch every 2 weeks. That way you avoid getting 15 heads of lettuce all ready on the same day and then nothing for weeks. It also helps if something doesn't germinate well. You've got a second chance. One more thing, keep an eye on your soil health. Even in a small backyard or container garden, your soil is alive. It needs organic matter, microbes, and nutrients. I always recommend mixing in compost once a month, or using something like worm castings or fish emulsion. They're mild, organic, and they feed the soils without burning the plants. And if you're in an apartment or have a limited space, you'd be amazed what you can do with a few fabric grow bags or window boxes. Basil, arugula, mint, radishes, these all do beautifully in containers. Just remember to water more often and check drainage. And let's not forget one of the most underrated gardening tools: observation. Seriously, just taking 10 minutes each morning to walk around your garden. See what's growing, what's wilting, what's blooming. It teaches you more than any book. You start to notice how your plants react to sun, shade, water, and heat. You become your own expert. Now, for those of you who are really passionate and want to turn your backyard into a mini farm, consider crop rotation. Don't plant tomatoes in the same spot every year. Rotate your bed to prevent disease and give the soil time to recover. And while we're on the topic of disease prevention, never forget airflow, especially with things like tomatoes, zucchinis, and squash, which can be prone to powdery mildew. Keep them pruned, give them room. Don't let leaves sit wet overnight. Good airflow is your first line of defense. So that's a lot to think about, I know. But the beauty of gardening is it doesn't have to be perfect. Every year is different. Every garden is its own teacher. You just have to show up, try, and keep learning. And hey, if you're ever in Vancouver, swing by our place, DEA Garden Center on the West End. We're always happy to chat about soil, seeds, shade, or whatever plant you're trying to revive. We've got a great selection of organic care products, starter kit, handmade pottery from Vietnam, and local advice. Happy growing, friends. Keep your hands dirty and your heart open to the garden.